It's a little bit confusing to me again. Like, KBS just came and was like,
I chose violence today.
Hi, welcome. My name is Angelina and this is my performance analysis series where I basically use my K-pop PhD, which took way too damn long to get, and analyze some performances for you guys, whether it's live vocals, whether they're lip syncing, and honestly just things that I liked or disliked about the performances in general. And today we are tackling KBS's Song Festival, which included a bunch of very interesting performances and collabs. Now, right off the bat, I have to tell you something that just breaks my heart. Everyone was lip syncing. Not really, but kind of. It was pretty close though. I definitely got a run for my money when groups who I expected to be live felt like they were lip syncing. So I thought it'd be super interesting to share with you guys my thoughts on this because no one is exempt from the ass hattery that KBS decided to do to everyone this year. So within the context of this show in particular, I saw two types of performances. So LAR performances, which are basically lip syncing performances. I will refer to you guys to my Mama video to get a more in-depth explanation about all of this. But I also saw some LMR performances, so live vocals peeking through a backup track. Though when this was the case, more often than not, those live vocals were so faint that it seemed like LAR anyways. And when you did hear live authentic vocals absolutely peeking through, I have no doubt that they were also smoothed out, which is another technique that K-pop uses. And again, I'm going to explain this very briefly. If an idol lip syncs, that is totally okay. There's much more to look into in terms of performances that people do enjoy. For me personally, I love live vocals and I connect with that, so that's what I look for.
And rarely find it.
But that's okay because I do not aim to stigmatize lip syncing in this series. My goal is to really normalize the fact that no, idols should not be expected to dance very intricately and sing in a perfectly stable voice. Because that is unreasonable and most of the time is not reflective of reality whatsoever. But in that same breath, if idols' voices are not absolutely perfect and maybe they have a voice crack or whatever the case may be, we also shouldn't aim to traumatize them and try to ruin their careers because you personally feel that imperfection means that they don't deserve to be an idol. So again, we have absolutely no idea what kind of editing goes into the final product, and this award show is definitely not reflective of what idols are capable of. We also don't know how many takes they did, all of that jazz. This is just based off what we can see from what they posted. Okay, so I wanted to start with these special stages because I felt those were very quite obviously LAR. So I wanted to take a look at this performance by the youngest members of Itzy, (G)I-dle, Oh My Girl, and IZONE. So they covered a song called I Don't Know by Apink. And I thought this would be the perfect example to show you a live all recorded performance versus a live music recorded performance. So back in 2011, Apink performed a song on music stages and they of course used LMR. So of course we have a backup track, but there's live vocals speaking through. There's a certain level of rawness that you can hear. But if we look at the 2020 cover, it's clear as day that they are lip syncing. First of all, more often than not, we can notice that their mouth shapes definitely don't match what we're hearing. For example, Yooa, it seems like she cuts this word short with her mouth shapes, but then you hear it continuing on in the audio. And another example of this, which is kind of the opposite actually, is Chungha, where she kind of extends the shape of her mouth to kind of prolong the singing, but the singing had already stopped at that point. And of course, this is a conversation that we have quite often on this channel, how vocals back in the day sounded a lot more raw, while nowadays it sounds a lot more refined. So let's take a look side by side again to really hear that difference within the vocals. But let me know your thoughts of this performance in the comments down below. And with that, I did want to take a minute to talk generally about these kind of 4th gen covers of 2nd gen groups, or even just covers in general. I've noticed that majoritarily the covers that you see, whether they're from 2nd gen or from just fellow artists are all LAR. And I've noticed this for a few years now, that within the context of an award show, you rarely hear idols cover someone else's song with their own live vocals. It doesn't matter if you're a group that typically sings live. So I wanted to ask you guys, do you think they do this because if the cover is not perfect, then maybe the fans of the original song would kind of drag them? So let me know what you think of that in the comments down below. Which brings us to the second special stage that we're going to talk about. So we have Taeyeon from IZONE and Chaeyeong from Itzy, who covered Taemin's Criminal and Chungha's Roller Coaster respectively, and then they came together at the end to do a dance performance of Rain on Me by Lady Gaga and Ariana Grande. So for those who don't know, Taeyeon and Chaeyeong are actually sisters, so it's a really interesting performance. They actually both appeared on 16 as well, the survival show that created Twice. So again, this is an LAR performance with no movement heard, and the energy is not matching the vocals. But I did want to point out the last part of the performance because I thought it was really cute. It reminded me of Crystal and Jessica from SM Entertainment, who covered TikTok by Kesha in their concerts. Which just goes to show that JYP copies everything SM does. That's a joke, but I've taken note of it. But again, even if I just listened to the audio alone, I could tell it's LAR. And then when you watch it mixed with their energy, you can tell even further that it's LAR, which is the case for the next two performances. So we have Ryujun from Itzy, Yooa from Oh My Girl, Sinb from Gfriend and Eunbi from IZONE, who covered NCT U's Boss. And then we also had Shotaro from NCT, Hyunjin from Stray Kids, Moonbin from Astro, and Juyeon from the Boyz, who covered Hard Carry by GOT7. So these were definitely super fun covers, but I did want to pinpoint the Boss cover for a second because I feel like KBS did the audio so dirty for this song. They didn't even bother to make it seem like it was live. Like, the vocals were so crystal clear to the point where it was overpowering even the instrumentals, and it just didn't really match whatsoever. Rather than straight up lip syncing, it almost went into the territory of just like bad production or like just like bad audio, which is a little fishy like, but again,
Not my circus.
On that note of wave era Hongjoong's wise words, I did want to point out something else that I thought was quite fishy, and it's something that I've noticed KBS doing a lot. So when fancams are usually released, you know, the audio has a little bit of an echo because someone is taking that video from far. Here's an example. You know, it sounds like you're recording a music stage from far with your phone. However, when KBS releases their fan cams, it seems that they add in the audio post-production because it sounds exactly like the final stage rather than, you know, a little bit echoey, or do you know what I mean? This isn't always the case, but it definitely seems to be mostly the case, and they very well could just be close enough to the stage where you don't really hear that same type of echo. Or maybe it's to avoid scandals, since SBS recently got into some trouble for what could be heard in the fan cam background. But let me know what you think. Do you think they're hiding something? Before diving into more LAR performances, let's talk about some live vocals. Or rather, the performances that gave me the most raw vocal vibes. Let's start with JYP and Sunmi. Now, they covered their own songs, so let's do some comparisons which I think accurately show the use of voice smoothing these days. So we have the original Nobody performance in 2008 versus the 2020 version. You can still kind of hear that voice smoothing, which brings us to When We Disco, which is the biggest perpetrator of auto-tune in my opinion, but at least we could feel that energy from the vocals regardless. So there's this one instance where it seems like JYP might have had a voice crack, or maybe he was a little bit unstable for a moment because obviously he's singing and dancing, but you still hear that movement even with the smoothing. And if we compare that to a regular performance of When We Disco, let's say this beautiful Mnet performance, which featured the most live vocals that I've seen in years, by the way. So for the original Mnet stage of When We Disco, you still have a certain level of voice smoothing, but I do feel like you can tell it's quite exaggerated in the KBS versions. And I did generally just feel a lot of authenticity from this stage. Like Sunmi, you could hear her breathing, but it wasn't those typical voice pops. Now this is a voice pop. And idols tend to record that into their lip syncing tracks. Now we did hear sometimes that this happened, but for the most part you could just hear her genuinely breathing. But overall, still quite smoothed out. Next up, we have Jessi, who performed Nunanana featuring Jackson, so that was a lot of fun. And Jessi, again, is an artist who is quite consistently singing live. But she did throw me a few curveballs in this performance where I'm like, does her voice actually match? Like, I was so skeptical because at that point, all of the stages that I had seen were very clearly edited, or you just really couldn't hear anyone. So I was like extra analytical for her. I'm like, does this match up? Am I seeing things? What is going on? Admittedly, I did find her backup track a little bit loud, but regardless, you could hear her voice, obviously. I'm trying to give you something more. You could tell when she was singing and when she wasn't. And though sometimes you could hear the difference between her voice and the backup track, I have this really weird feeling that KBS still messed with the backup track in some ways. And this was pretty consistent throughout the live performances where sometimes it matched, but then sometimes it didn't. For example, Stray Kids. So for Stray Kids, their vocals did peek through as well, though compared to their regular stages, I did find that many members were overpowered by their backup tracks. Their BTS cover in particular was a bit confusing because there were instances where it seemed quite clearly LAR. But then there were instances where you could kind of hear two voices and it just sounded like the backup track was too loud. Similarly with God's Menu, we saw the same thing. But in this case, at least, we did hear some of those vocals peeking through a lot more. And for other members with handheld mics who were overpowering their backup tracks, it still very much felt like they were struggling to overpower them. In that example, you might have noticed that you could hear when he stopped in both cases, but the backup track was much louder in the KBS example. So though live vocals were definitely peeking through, I would definitely say that KBS was really favoring backup tracks for a lot of these performances. Now I also have Hwasa in this kind of list of top live vocals, but it's a little bit confusing to me. Again, like KBS just came and was like,
I chose violence today.
Because again, there were definitely instances where it felt like it didn't quite match, but there were also instances where she stopped and resumed her line and you could clearly see that. So overall, these are the LMR performances where I felt like the vocals peaked through the most, but do not be mistaken because these are not the only idols who had LMR performances, in my opinion. I think there were many more, but you really couldn't hear those voices very well at all. So let's talk about them. So for groups that usually quite consistently sing live, for example, Itzy. Not gonna lie, I was fully convinced that they were doing LAR because you really weren't hearing the vocals peek through like they usually do. Here's an example of a typical Itzy performance versus their KBS performance. Especially for Itzy, like you could kind of hear this faintest little voice in the background trying to peek through. It was almost a little bit disturbing.
And that's not important right now.
I mean, we have to admit it was really the choreography that was the focal point for this performance, and it was definitely something I appreciated. Another example of vocals struggling to peek through the backup track is Monsta X. And I think even maybe Mamamoo, though I'm really not even sure that I could hear them. Similarly for GOT7, I showed clear examples of them performing LAR at Mama, but then at the TMA Awards, they were performing live. So here again, I was very convinced that it was LAR, but then, you know, the vocalist with the handheld mic, you could kind of hear him not syncing with the backup track. But, you know, like whether or not we're really hearing that rawness was a little bit confusing. You know, I've given this example again of Bam Bam jumping in the air and his vocals staying perfectly stable. People have said, you know, if you do MR remove, you can hear him singing. Well, if the track is LAR, if the idol is lip syncing and you remove the MR, like, what do you expect to hear? They weren't singing live to begin with, so you're just going to hear that lip syncing track. But I did want to talk about multiple takes because we did have a special stage with NCT, Stray Kids, and Monsta X. So this is an example of where I thought it was live at first because we could hear a backup track. Especially for NCT, which is super rare, you're hearing a backup track and usually you hear very smooth, very perfected vocals. So I'm hearing this backup track, I'm hearing seemingly live vocals, still auto-tuned, but what I'm seeing does not match whatsoever. Mark's mouth shapes are not keeping up with what we're hearing. And then same goes for Stray Kids. And even for Monsta X. So I wondered, you know, maybe it is live, but they added backup vocals and did a few takes so it just doesn't match. And you wouldn't believe what I found. Turns out KBS was hiding something. Because for these fan cams, it seems like they were not edited. So for Monsta X, you hear that rawness in the fan cam that is not there in the final stage. And similarly, as I was saying for Mark, he wasn't really keeping up with his rap. It's kind of difficult to hear in that fan cam, but you actually can hear when he stops rapping at those parts while his voice was added into the final stage. So it's reasons like this that it becomes incredibly hard to even find out if a performance is actually live or is it not live. You end up having to do so much research and going frame by frame just to figure out if idols are singing live, and I feel like there should just be an easier way. BTS as well, for I Need You, I felt like I was hearing two voices, like there was a backup track and voices peeking through. But then for Dynamite and Life Goes On, you hear that clear distinction between their voices. I'm not showing you some examples because Big Hit came for me last time. Just know that Dynamite and Life Goes On seemed very much LAR, members taking mics away too soon, and it seemed like that in I Need You as well, but we're also hearing that backup track that we don't hear in Dynamite and that we don't hear in Life Goes On. So again, is this like a new type of LAR where they're lip syncing over them having actually performed in real time? It's confusing as hell once again. Because for LAR, the quote-unquote live vocals are recorded when idols are not in movement, right? Hence why it doesn't match their energy. So if you're lip syncing over vocals that you recorded while you were actually dancing, I feel like it creates a really weird gray area in terms of the line between a live performance and a not live performance. So now we're going to move into some performances that were more traditionally LAR and caused much less confusion to me. So we have our usual Twice, IZONE, NCT, Taemin, and now even Aespa. First of all, I loved their stage outfits. It was basically a mix of their regular stage outfits, but they put an award show twist onto that. Though they have seemingly been criticized for these outfits in particular, and I do have to agree, I do not know who signed off on this. I personally, not my cup of tea. But now I love Aespa, I love Black Mamba, definitely a song that I love a lot. But again, we're hearing the same exact breath sounds at the same exact times, and their facial expressions and their mouth shapes just are not matching what we're hearing. And again, let's add NCT and Taemin into this whole equation. How do you realistically expect these idols to throw themselves around and do high notes and be perfectly stable? It's not reasonable to expect that. For example, let's compare a 2012 EXO performance versus an NCT performance on KBS. Again, we'll hear how you used to be able to hear the struggle, and those vocals were reflective of those movements. But you'll notice SM in 4th gen times sounds consistently much different. So, to conclude this section on SM vocals, of course, SM artists are super talented, but it really depends on what SM wants. For example, I've seen instances from 10 years ago where SM artists were lip-syncing as well. For example, this What Is Love performance by EXO, the same exact group where I showed you an example of live vocals. And this can be the case for many groups that typically do LAR. I just point out SM Entertainment as a company because I've realized company-wide it tends to be a trend. Okay, so let's talk about Twice. I loved the holiday theme of More and More. It was so cute. KBS really went all out for this stage. And then they also performed Signal, which I thought was a very cool throwback performance. However, I thought it was another instance of bad audio because for some members, you couldn't hear their voices at all. And I thought, wow, this sounds really bad. And then I realized it's actually the audience singing along with them. Now for I Can't Stop Me, I actually have a live stage to compare it to, so let us take a look. Notice how in the live version, Nayeon stops singing during this difficult move, while in the LAR version, she sounds perfectly stable. And most beautifully, I just had to share this with you guys. We hear Jihyo's voice peeking through and you hear that struggle. You hear her breathing and I think it's absolutely beautiful. And I wanted to point this out because actually a lot of artists do LAR performances, but when I say that Twice do LAR, I feel like they get the most hate in my comment section, so I did want to point out that yes, everyone is talented and capable of giving beautiful live performances, but whether or not we get to witness that is a completely different story. So we're going to go over the rest of the performances quite briefly, but I did want to take a little moment to talk about New East. So they were also doing LAR, and actually, fun fact, during the first year of their career, I was a huge stan. Ren was the love of my life, and his photo was the background on my Kakao chats. Needless to say, I was there for their live vocals. So let's take a look at this 2012 performance versus this 2020 performance so we can hear the difference. Now keep in mind, in 2012, we're still in this transitional period into 3rd gen, so I feel like the backup track is getting louder and louder, but we still hear things peeking through. And on that note of other performances that seemed more traditionally LAR, we have Momoland and Hyphen, i-dle, and IZONE. While groups like Gfriend, Oh My Girl, TXT, and the Boyz could honestly maybe be LAR, but again, it falls into this category where it's kind of confusing. Maybe I'm hearing one member, but not really the rest. So I think the more likely answer is that it's just convincingly live LAR because I really didn't hear any struggles whatsoever, nor any movements, and for the most part, the energies didn't always match either. So yes, the rawness was definitely a little bit lacking in this award show, but we still could hear some live vocals at least. But I always say there's so much to appreciate from a performance, from the choreography, from just the energy. There's a lot more to appreciate than just vocals. That's just personally what I look for and what I appreciate. So that is basically it for this video. Thank you so much if you made it this far. Also, don't forget I have opened the voting for Angelina's K-pop Music Awards show, also known as AKMA. So please make sure you vote and maybe force friends that you don't have to vote as well. Don't forget to join my channel memberships by clicking the join button next to the subscribe button. These are the lovely individuals who help support my channel on a monthly basis. Thank you so much. As for me, I'm gonna get going, so I'll see you guys next time. Bye!